It is the most important meeting of regional leaders, Caricom. 30 delegations from 20 countries are here for the 44th meeting of the heads of government to discuss what they call matters of mutual interest. It's all Caribbean business. Among the many topics on the agenda, climate change and the looming crisis in Haiti. Welcome to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Our topic tonight, Caricom, absorbing the Haitian exodus and climate change. Our guests, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Fred Mitchell, career diplomat, Rhoda Jackson, and all the way from the United Arab Emirates, the Minister of State for International Cooperation, Rahim Ibrahim Al-Hashimi. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break. So the project really pays itself back.
Correct.
They set up
at the conference, the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV. Welcome back to On the Record. We are coming to you from the Bahama Resort on Cable Beach. As Caricom is taking place, we have decided, of course, to dedicate this show to Caricom. Our topic tonight is Caricom. We're focusing on two things specifically, absorbing the Haitian exodus and climate change. I'm joined for this segment by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Honorable Fred Mitchell. Minister, welcome to our show. First of all, how's it going? We're obviously celebrating the 50th anniversary of Caricom. There's so much going on. I think really in looking at it in totality, this is probably, I think, one of the most comprehensive meetings since the COVID pandemic. I know there was the regular last year, but certainly this seems to be a lot bigger and a lot more focused.
Well, I think it's in part because of the confluence of the 50th anniversary of Caricom and the 50th anniversary of our own independence. And so the Prime Minister wanted to make sure that as many of his colleagues came. I think we've got something like 40 ambassadors here from countries outside of Caricom, so it's quite a huge meeting and an important meeting. And I was saying in another context, in another place, that I'm really appreciative of the public support of this because it's been inconvenient, you know, with all the security arrangements. Unfortunately, there was a breach of the security by someone who was designing to cause mischief, I assume, and that person's been detained and hopefully will be charged if there are any charges which come out of it. But the inconvenience of the public, I hope too many people are not annoyed by it, but these things happen when you have these kinds of meetings. And, you know, some people are always saying that we need to invite the President of the United States here. And I remember George Bush saying to Perry Christie, do you really want that? Because, you know, he travels with 1,200 people. I
say to people, I remember, you know, and I put it in context. I remember when Barack Obama came to Trinidad for Summit of the Americas and what that caused. And I think sometimes we don't realize the level of security needed for an event like this. And just want to touch on that very quickly. You mentioned sort of the public inconvenience, but from, you know, where you sit, you know, do people really understand fully what goes into bringing all of these leaders and ambassadors into one place?
I don't think they do, and I don't really expect them to, because, you know, you're trying to get to work. I mean, and then, you know, you're being blocked. I think in some instances people said it took about an hour and a half for them to get to their destination, so I understand the annoyance. But at the particular time that happened, I think the police were not sure what was going on. The person, by some fraudulent means, was able to check into the hotel in advance, and no one knew what the effect of that was going to be. And so, as a result, there was a complete shutdown for a while till they got the parameters of what happened. And then, of course, it disappeared. But it requires patience. It doesn't last long, but I just want the public to be aware.
Did that have any impact, though, on the meetings themselves? I mean, to know that you had a security breach so early on, was there any impact? Was anyone really ever in any danger?
No, no one was in any danger. There was no disruption of any kind. They got on top of it fairly quickly. And there doesn't seem to be any wider implications to it than what we saw.
I want to talk a bit about Caricom itself. I mean, obviously people are watching the activities, and I know you get this question 100 times, but why or how important is it for us to continue to be so involved in Caricom and to put forth the positions that we do and have these discussions? Bahamians will say, well, do we really need to be a part of this? Do we really have the same concerns as the rest of the Caribbean?
Well, we do. Climate change is existential for us. All of us face the disappearance of these countries below the waters if we don't do something to reverse it. So you got to speak with one voice, and that's one of the things that John Kerry and Chris Dodd were all talking about, is the importance of the moral voice of the smaller countries to talk about these issues, because it's easy when you're in a bigger country to just forget it, because these are sort of vacation spots which you can decide not to come to ultimately. But yeah, the market here is in the Caricom region is less than 20 million, and half of those are Haitian, so that's about 11 million people who are Haitian citizens. The rest of us are very small populations. So when do you get to deal with the bigger countries? And that's usually in the UN context or OAS context, and so your votes begin to count in those fora. And it's best if you work in concert as opposed to each person trying to forge their own way. So we signed the Treaty of Chaguaramas. We're not part of the single market economy, but we're committed to functional cooperation. So that means we're in all the institutions like University of the West Indies, which trains most of our doctors and most of our lawyers. So it's things like that.
Important stuff. You mentioned, in your summation of the population and the fact that half are Haitian. And here we are again at these meetings looking at the looming crisis in Haiti, and I want to sort of hone in on that for a minute. What is it that leaders are hoping to have happen from these discussions? I know Haiti has asked for assistance, but what is it, or what is the end goal on the discussions this week?
Well, there are only two players, maybe three, in the hemisphere that can actually, they actually have the manpower and equipment to deal with the security intervention which is necessary to bring some stability and security within the country so that they can have elections. Canadians, the Americans, and Brazil. Brazil, because of its last experience there, totally gun-shy, and I'm not sure whether the administration just changed. I'm not sure whether Lula has changed his position, but the last administration said, look, we just don't have any appetite for this. The Americans, for their own reasons, are also gun-shy about a full-force invasion or intervention, and they've looked to the Canadians as a kind of interim or middle position. So what we're hoping is, it's now almost 6 months since this request was made by the Haitian government, and I think they're just getting, antsy. The situation is getting worse. So we need to do something. So the ideas are being discussed. There's a caucus with the Canadian Prime Minister. It's the principal reason he's here, to determine just what to do and when to do it. So that's what we hope to get out of it.
We're going to take a quick break in our show right at this point, come back, continue our discussion with the Minister. Stay with us. We're back right after this. So the project really pays itself back.
Correct.
They set up
At the conference, the school
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV.
Welcome back. We are coming to you from the Bahama Resort on Cable Beach, where the 44th meeting of Caricom heads of government continues. Minister Fred Mitchell, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, is my guest. Sir, this week, I think some of us are really stunned with some of the news that we received. Your reaction to the news that the United States has charged and indicted 4 Americans in the assassination plot of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse.
Well, people had been arrested before, and these are additional indictments. I don't think the justice system in Haiti had the capacity to deal with this. They had made some arrests, but even the judges got frightened with dealing with it because they were being threatened. So obviously a major power had to deal with this. And many of these people are U.S. citizens, and so it was easy for them to do so. So no issue there. I think it is important that we find out what was the motivation behind this and who is responsible for it, because it's quite a shocking thing to kill a leader of a country. And so I think the trial will help put an end to that.
Help us to understand, though, if I guess this is certainly from a foreign affairs perspective, if a leader of a country has been murdered, and those who are accused are being tried in another country, I guess help us to understand the optics of that. How does it work? Because if something happened to a leader in my country, I would look for that trial to take place here, but now it's happening in the United States.
Well, I think in this case, what has happened is the person's absconded to the United States. Mm-hmm. And my understanding is they've been charged with killing a foreign leader, which is an offense in the United States.
Okay.
So they've been charged under U.S. law for doing that. Now, you have, of course, other examples like the Rwanda trials and the trials of the Serbians and the war that took place in Eastern Europe, where the justice systems of those particular countries are unable to deal with the matters domestically. So in those cases, you need special tribunals, and that's happened. You're tried at The Hague, or I think the trial was taking place in Tanzania for some offenses that took place in Rwanda during the war there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, I want to continue our focus really on what has happened since the assassination of President Moïse. We have seen sort of the degradation of justice and anarchy in many ways, and the residual effect that is having even on the Bahamas. There is this growing concern that if this instability continues, we are going to feel the effects. Is that a real fear?
Well, I don't know whether it's a fear, but you can anticipate there will be effects. What I disagree with is people are talking themselves into a crisis, and this is, of course, being led by people who just have motivations. They're trying to get into the House of Assembly, and they figure that this is a convenient thing to suggest to people that there's these hordes, these black hordes from the South are taking over. Never mind that, every week, every month, people are being given permanent residence in this country by just paying $500,000, but nobody cares about that. And you saw about what happened in Life at Key. They write one letter to a prime minister, the law gets changed. So, wealthy people have an outsized influence as opposed to these poor people who are coming from the South. But these poor people who work here have largely built the country. I mean, if you go to the construction sites, the gas stations, the home caregivers, the gardeners, that's who they are. I mean, they're here because of work. But in any event, something struck me from a survey that was done by the International Organization for Migration. I think it was back in 2006, maybe, when they did this study. And they said on any given day they were, 75,000 people of Haitian ancestry or descent here in the Bahamas. And but they said they were all in stages of moving to the States. So whether they were here for 1 year, 15 years, 2 days, basically they're headed to the States. So the most recent group, and there's another one, I think there's a ship now with 200 that just came in that's going down to Inagua today or tomorrow. And then prior to that, there were 400. But all of those, they weren't trying to get here. They were trying to go to the U.S. We interdicted 3,500 or so last year, which is 3 times the normal number. So the point I'm making is that the institutions in this country are working and doing the job. Obviously, there's an elevated platform, but they're doing the job. So to me, crisis translates into the institutions have collapsed. We are not at that stage. We can talk ourselves into that stage if we listen to various people, but I think people need to apply their rational minds to what's happening and see that the country is functioning.
You think it's fear-mongering?
There's no question that that's what it is. It's driven by a particular kind of politics, which is to say to people, you're being deprived by a group of people who are coming to take over your country. And that's not the case. The evidence is not that these people want to take over this country. The evidence is quite the opposite. The evidence is they want to integrate into the country, and left to them, I'm sure they would never even identify themselves as being part of Haitian heritage. But that being what it is. So I mean, the whole point I'm making is an appeal to rationality, and for people to keep their right minds with this and not talk ourselves into an emergency.
So while we, as you've admitted to, while we have the agencies here who are working to try and deal with the influx, what are the discussions like with the Haitian government, or are there any discussions in helping to stem the illegal migration from the Haitian side?
Problem is that the effective reach of the government is not there. I mean, the Prime Minister said to our Prime Minister this morning that he's very embarrassed by these migration things, but effectively can't do anything about it unless you're able to resolve the internal problems. Now, one of the things about Haiti, of course, is that there's Port-au-Prince, and then there's the north of Haiti, and the people who come this way come from the north of Haiti, Cape Haitian and points north. So that is a different dynamic. But again, I say, when you look at the paperwork of the people who are on these boats, they're actually headed to Key West, not to Anguilla Key. I assure you, they don't want to go to Anguilla Key because there's nothing in Anguilla Key. What is there is something in Key Largo, there's something in Miami, and that's where they're headed.
And how much of this responsibility must we bear as Bahamians? Because, it comes down to me to the supply and demand. So there's the demand, whether they're coming here to work or transiting to the U.S., Bahamians are playing a role.
Yeah, well, there's the smuggling side, which is $5,000 a pop we hear now, so Bahamians make a lot of money off that. But Nicolette Bethel, who's at the University of the Bahamas, said something in one of her sort of satirical pieces where she said, the Bahamas is a rich country and Haiti is a poor country. So the reason why Haitians come to the Bahamas is because they want to leave a poor country and come to a rich country. So she says, if you want to make Haitians stop coming to the Bahamas, just make the Bahamas a poor country and they'll stop coming. But you see, you see, so,
or help to make Haiti a better country.
Right. So the point is though that it's the economics that are driving people to come here. There is economic demand at a certain level for their services, which are not being filled by Bahamians. Now, people will say that this is a deliberate thing to keep Bahamians out of jobs, but you ask any contractor in this country if they can find masons, carpenters when they need them on demand, and you'll find that there's a complaint both about the work ethic and the actual availability of staff. So that's the problem we face.
How does the region help Haiti's economic position? I mean, violence is one thing, but what can we do to Nicolette Bethel's point, to help make Haiti if not a rich country, a better country? What can the region do on the economic side? Because providing security is one thing, but that's a temporary fix. That's to get things under control. This is a systemic problem with Haiti. I mean, their poverty and the economic situation. What can we do as a region to help?
Agriculture seems to me major thing. I mean, and tourism. So those two things. Bahamians have surplus capital, and they can invest in agriculture. Labor is cheap, and so I think that's the thing to do, particularly in the north of Haiti where they are connected to us, because one of the things you'll find is when you go down, I'm told, to Haiti, you'll find Cartwrights and McKenzies and Smiths, all of whom are Haitian, but of course they were born here. It's very much like the Turks and Caicos Islanders. So that's obviously part of the solution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Minister, thank you very much.
Right.
We're out of time. I know you're busy. You've got a lot going on. We appreciate you stopping by, and continued success on the conference. I know this is a great responsibility, but I think a good time for the Bahamas really to showcase who we are and what we're doing. It. I would love to be honest, it's a good time to all be back together post-COVID.
Yeah.
So I'm sure people are happy to be here.
Yeah, there are. Tell me about it.
Stuff. Thank you very much. We're going to take a break and continue with more On the Record from the Bahama Resort right after this. So the project really pays itself back.
Correct.
They set up
At the conference, the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV.
Welcome back. You are watching On the Record. This week's show, of course, is very special to us because we are on vacation, coming to you from the 44th meeting of Caricom heads here at the Bahama Resort on Cable Beach. A busy week, not just for the delegates of the Bahamas, but certainly the delegates from all over who have come here. And we are very fortunate now to have somebody who knows the ins and outs of these kinds of meetings. She is a career diplomat, currently serving as the Director General for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Rhoda Jackson. Rhoda, welcome to On the Record.
Thank you very much for having me here, Jerome.
I'm honored, really. I mean, I've known you all of my my reporting life. In many conferences, I see you moving about, and to me, you represent that consistency and that constant with the government, because you've been working in this industry for so long through various governments and ministers. And you understand the big story, you understand the big picture. And so let's talk a little bit about sort of what it is that your role entails. What is it that you do at these meetings to prepare the delegates, the ministers, those who are representing the country?
All right, thank you very much. These meetings are held so that governments and member states can come together to talk. A lot of diplomacy is about negotiations and managing relationships. So it's important for them to come together and look at an issue and determine what's the best solution for that. But you ought to bear in mind that so often you come together and somebody comes with a different view or may have a different interest.
Or agenda.
Or a different agenda, and that happens from time to time as well.
Yes.
But the important thing is bringing everybody to the table to have a conversation. And in that conversation, you may not get everything that you want, and the other party may not get everything that he or she wants. But at least you can come together, identify the problems, and see this is what I can take away from it. And that's very important, and dialogue is so very important in all that we do really in diplomacy. If you look at what happens in the United Nations, the countries come together, they may discuss a draft resolution, and knowing that they won't get everything, they will still say, well, I can accept this, I can accept that. I will not go beyond that point. But you bring everybody together and see what's best for the common good. And that really is what diplomacy is all about, how we manage our relationships with other persons, with other countries, and that involves dialogue and cooperation.
How, I guess, explain to us how the differences between, let's say, when you're dealing with a Caricom, which is a regional grouping, versus a United Nations, which is a global grouping. What may be the difficulties or the differences in the two?
Caricom is really a sub-regional grouping, especially within the United Nations, because we are part of the group of Latin America and the Caribbean. So we are somewhat a sub-regional grouping. That regional grouping for Latin America and the Caribbean is one of 5 regional groupings in the United Nations. And even though we may just be small developing countries in the United Nations, we still can become a powerful force, because the 15 member countries of Caricom, when it comes to voting, that's when you see the role that we play. When you can get 15 votes from a particular sub-region, if you're looking for the post of a Secretary General or a seat on the Security Council or the Human Rights Council, that is 15 votes that you value. And even though, like I said earlier, we may be smaller countries with smaller populations, the good thing about the United Nations, each country has the same vote.
Generally, does Caricom come to the United Nations as a bloc? Do we normally agree on things when we come to the United Nations? Because that's a bigger forum now.
Right. Generally speaking, they consult either at the level of foreign ministers, at the level of heads. There is consultation, but bear in mind that each country still has the right to protect its own interests. And there may be occasions where there's a general consensus, but we ought to bear in mind that perhaps a particular country may have a particular interest, and in that case, that country may feel free to vote however it wishes. But generally speaking, because we represent pretty much people of the same nature, historical background, political ideologies, we
Even
tend
cultures,
to, and cultures, right? We tend to vote together on some issues, and that's very important for us, because whatever happens for one country tends to be a benefit for the region. So that's one reason why we collaborate.
How do you, or how does a country formulate, or what goes into formulating a position on a particular issue? Because a lot of times we'll come to Caricom with a position on an issue, and whether we're for or against. So let's look, for instance, let's say the single market and economy. We know that the Bahamas is not signed on to that, and there are no plans for that to happen. But along those lines, what goes into formulating that position when you're coming to a meeting like a Caricom?
It's important to bear in mind that the country has its own national interests. You just mentioned that the Bahamas is not a member of the single market economy for Caricom. We have a particular interest in that because we have our parity with the US dollar, and that's something that we want to preserve and protect. So we took the decision not to join on. However, when you look at matters that pertain to climate change, which is something that's important to all of us, generally speaking, we all have the same issues with climate change. So we would collectively, in a unified voice, say to the international community, sea level rise is a problem for us. Loss and damage, some funding for that is an issue for us. The common things that we have, we seek to collaborate on them, build consensus, still bearing in mind the national interest. So even when we're formulating a particular position, each country looks and decides, is this going to benefit my country as an individual country first? And then you look at the wider picture. How will this benefit the region? Because if it's going to affect my country, it perhaps will affect the other countries of the region. So those are important issues to take into consideration. And we recognize that because we're not just looking at an individual country, but a region, we have to present a global front to the international community and make sure that our interests, our collective interests, that is being preserved.
I think this gives us, these meetings really give us an opportunity as Bahamians to really examine Caricom, our role, our history, etc. And national interest aside, how do we get Bahamians to really value and understand why our involvement is so important?
I think because we're so far removed from the Caribbean Sea, there's a sense sometimes that we're not a part of the Caribbean. But we know that historically we are. Culturally we are. Socially we are.
Yes.
Geopolitically we are.
Yeah.
And no, that's true. So who else do we latch on to, so to speak? Yes. The world has moved away from more bilateralism to multilateralism. You know, with bilateralism, you have a dominant country that's there, sort of like providing support to a less dominant country. Here, we're looking at multilateralism, where all the countries together with a common interest come and project or come to seek to protect their own interests. And multilateralism now is really the way to deal with issues. It can no longer be operating in silos, because that may not be your primary interest. It may be an interest, but not a primary interest. But now we've got to move to see how we can benefit collectively. And even as Bahamians, when you look at what's happening around the world with respect to development assistance, again, in the past, we had more bilateral relations. The developed countries determined which countries they wanted to work with, so to speak. Now, you find that, for example, the European Union, they no longer do these bilateral relations and have the national indicative program. Everything now is lumped together as a region. And right now for the European Union, it's the Caricom and Dominican Republic and Cuba for CARIFORUM. So the approach now has changed. It's not just looking at individual countries, although there are still bilateral relations that exist. But in terms of development assistance, development cooperation, it's more a multilateral approach. And that's why it's important for us to remain engaged. The Bahamas has to be at the table in order to ensure that its interest is being protected. I know we see Bahamians or Foreign Service officers attending meetings all around, but that's necessary, because so often your voice will not be heard. And I would like to draw an illustration. Some years ago, we were negotiating the text for financing for development document. This is back in 2002. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the developed countries wanted to slip language into the document about tax havens. There were 5 Caribbean countries at that meeting that night, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they waited then because
they figured you were tired.
We were tired. They figured we were tired, but they were able to change their delegation based on every paragraph almost. But the persons who were there, we had to do the whole thing.
We didn't have the numbers.
No, we didn't have the numbers. But these 5, when the developed country suggested the language, the chair of G77 said, "Oh, we have no problem with that." And all of a sudden, the 5 of us shot up, because we knew that the issue of being called tax havens for the Caribbean heads, that was a priority. We sought to move away from that topic just to preserve our integrity as financial centers. Had we not been there, that topic or that language would have been used in the document to our detriment. And we figured, all of us would have been sent home right away by our heads on stage. But that's why it's important for us to be at the table.
Understand. And I think I'm so happy that you explained that, because I think far too often we get caught up in the optics. Oh, they're going again, or they're traveling again, or they're at some of the meeting again. But to the point, if you're not at the table, you don't have a voice.
That primarily is it. And this administration, the Prime Minister Davis has indicated that he wants to expand the global reach, our global footprint. And every effort is being made to ensure that we put ourselves in positions where we can benefit from situations, where we can benefit from development cooperation, where we can benefit really in terms of bringing our story to the world. Because when you look at what diplomacy is all about, in addition to dialogue, we're really telling the world about the Bahamas. We're saying, this is what the Bahamas is doing when it comes to persons with disability. This is what the Bahamas is doing when it comes to protecting the environment. This is what the Bahamas is doing in terms of meeting or ensuring that our people have good health. All we do as diplomats is we tell the story of the world. And this is why it's important for us to know our story, but it's important for us to also tell the story so that the world can know what it is we're doing here.
I think you said something so very significant and poignant. The fact that this Prime Minister and the administration is very deliberate in taking the message globally and getting on the global stage and having those conversations. But a lot of times the criticism back home is, oh, he's traveling again, or the delegation is gone again. How do we do a better job in communicating these kinds of messages to our people so we understand the work involved? You can't do the work, you can't sell, you can't have the conversation from home.
Well, you have to convince the people at home first.
Right.
And I think part of it comes by us educating the Bahamian public.
Like maybe doing these more.
Maybe doing these types of engagements more often, so that they know it's not just another photo op, it's not just attending another reception, because even receptions, that's where a lot of decisions are made.
I know.
In the corridors of
Yes.
these events.
Over very polite conversation, but the decision.
We call them in the UN the green room discussions, okay? But it's important to recognize that, no, it's just not a photo op or something of the sort, but it's an opportunity for us, again. And let me give you another example. When I was appointed ambassador to Geneva, the Bahamas was not known really as with respect to the human rights issues. Mm-hmm. One of the things we sought to do was expand our reach when it came to human rights. And coming out of that engagement and just being present at the Human Rights Council, we partnered with a number of developed countries. Because of our engagement there, we got opportunities for Bahamians to come and visit or be a part of human rights training programs, so that we can come back home and understand how we ought to be writing these reports that go back to the UN. Once you start telling your story, you have other delegations who say, oh, we're doing something similar, perhaps we can collaborate. Or some developed countries will come and say, this is a priority for our government. Let's see how we can work together and we can help you. If we don't get out there and tell our story, they won't know what the story is all about.
Rhoda Jackson, I want to thank you for coming by and talking to us. I knew you were out of time.
We're finished?
We are done. Unfortunately, I'll give you another minute in there. But what do you hope to see? We see, all that's gone into these meetings, Caricom, and people see the external, the streets getting paved, they paint, put up flags, etc. But again, I'm going to ask you this. What does success look like for you? What does success look like for you coming out of these meetings? What would you like to see?
Well, I know for the Prime Minister, climate change is an issue. At least if we come together and talk about climate change and talk about the impact of climate change and what it is that we can do, that collectively, that would be a success story. And not just talk shop, as the Prime Minister says, we need to stop talking, and we're saying this to the developed partners as well. We need to stop talking and start doing, because for us, it is critical to our existence. Here again, the question of security for the region, that is something that's important. So as we continue to talk, we continue to collaborate, and we find viable solutions to bring about a place of safety, a place of friendly environment for our people.
And thank you so much for that. And you have unknowingly taken us to our next guest. So thank you very much for talking about what needs to happen when it comes to especially climate change, because we're going to talk about that in a minute. But again, I want to thank you for coming on and speaking with us. It's not often that we hear from the folks, I call them at the back of house, who are doing the work. But thank you, and thank you for all of your service to country over the years. I think people don't realize what it means to have a Rhoda Jackson represent us around the world. So thank you very much. Continue the great work.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Thank you so much.
Stay with us. We're going to be back with more On the Record from Caricom right after this. So the project really pays itself back.
Correct.
They set up
At the conference, the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV.
Welcome back to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Again, we are coming to you from the beautiful Bahama Resort on Cable Beach. Our topic tonight is Caricom. Two things specifically that we're discussing: absorbing the Haitian exodus and climate change. In this segment, though, we turn our attention to a priority item on the agenda, which of course is climate change. I'm very pleased to be joined in this segment by the Minister of State for International Cooperation in the United Arab Emirates, Her Excellency Rima Ibrahim Al-Hassimi. Excellency, thank you so much for joining us here on The Record. We're honored to have you in this space with us today.
Thank you so much for making the time to see me. I'm very happy to be here.
Now, I have to ask you, because, you know, we are used to hosting guests, how was your time in the Bahamas? How
Oh,
has it been?
goodness, it's too short. I'm afraid I'm leaving later on today, but I've loved every minute since I arrived yesterday.
And we're very, very happy to have you. So let's jump in now to our discussion. I know that you've come with a delegation to represent your country's shared interests in our region, but first tell us a little bit about the significance of Caricom, of this Caricom meeting to your country.
Well, Caricom is celebrating its Golden Jubilee. Bahamas and the United Arab Emirates have a very special relationship. In fact, we have a pretty close one with a number of countries in your region, and this is my third visit here. I'm very excited about seeing how we can progress things bilaterally, but also to look at what are some of the big issues that afflict all of us. And like you said in your introduction, climate change is one of those issues that spares no one. The UAE will be hosting COP28 later this year. And I'm really here in the spirit of listening to what the countries of the Caribbean want to see in COP28 and how we can properly and respectfully reflect those perspectives in the Conference of the Parties later on this year.
You know, often we feel, because we are so small, our carbon footprint is small, we're small in population and size, we feel sometimes that our voices are not heard on the world stage. You know, we've had experiences at COP in the past. We continue to push the same message. Our Prime Minister continues to push the same message. But how do you reassure smaller nations like ours that we will be heard, we have a seat at the table, and that other countries are paying attention to what we have to say?
So we totally understand that because we're small too. And we recognize that countries in the global south deserve to have an equal footing, an equal platform, certainly if they're the ones that are being impacted the most. And so the visit here is really in that spirit to say we will listen, we will learn, and we will do our very best to ensure that we're reflecting that to our other partners and stakeholders.
Over the recent decades, our region, the Bahamas in particular, has really bore the brunt of a lot of these changes we've seen in the climate. Most recently, as you would know, we experienced the worst disaster in our country's history, Hurricane Dorian. And although countries and world leaders acknowledge that our region contributes the least in terms of the carbon footprint, economies such as ours that are already struggling with debt to GDP ratios and securing international financing and struggling tremendously to bounce back, is the UAE committed to supporting the region's effort in this fight? We've talked about countries, you know, our small stake, but as a region now, you know, what are you looking to really support our efforts in this regard?
We have for a number of years, and we've always been committed to reaching out to folks. And if I look at natural disasters, I will say that we have been first and foremost in support, whether it was Haiti, the earthquake years ago, or Hurricane Dorian, or the many others that have afflicted this part of the world. If I look at COVID, we were one of the first countries to send vaccines and to send, at that time we had a shortage, as you know, of masks and of sanitizers and of PCR kits, etc. So the outward nature of the UAE in lending support across the board, whether it's climate related or it's health or it's humanitarian, has always been there. We have renewable energy funds, which we've specifically allocated for small island developing states, which we've launched over a decade ago, both the Pacific and the Caribbean, to use these funds to develop and scale up renewable energy projects. And I think, actually, I believe that through the context of COP, we can further create more catalysts to bring attention to what's happening here, but also to highlight that there has to be more that we can do together.
I know that your country's response to climate change has been about controlling the effects of emissions and reducing the flaring of natural gases, even increasing energy efficiency. have you been able to have those discussions with our leaders about some of the things that you are doing that we may be able to benefit from?
Yeah, so we're in discussions. I had an amazing meeting yesterday with Prime Minister Davis and meeting with the rest of the leadership here in this Caricom summit, which has brought everyone together. To be frank, Jerome, I think we need to learn from each other. And we need to better recognize how we can take some of these challenges and find innovative solutions or scale up your existing innovative solutions that are also applicable in other parts of the world. We are very much looking forward to a practical COP, a impact-oriented one, and we need to bring the industry into the mix as well, and we need to recognize that low carbon emission, innovative manners in which you can still have fuel and energy, but also scale up renewables and try to keep 1.5 degrees Celsius still on the table. Our COP is also the Global Stocktake COP, which means we're going to do an audit, if you will, of where are we as an international community vis-a-vis our planet. And we know our planet is struggling because she's been saying that in every part of the world.
In so many ways.
In so many ways.
Yes.
And are we listening enough? And if we're listening, are we acting enough? And so we want to cater our COP in a collective fashion and in a collective manner to just better respond.
We've learned recently about the UAE's Net Zero by 2050 strategic initiative, which is quite commendable. It's a national drive to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, making the Emirates the first Middle East and North African nation to do so. Do you think that yours is an ambitious goal, and why do you think other countries have not been as eager in this regard?
Because it's difficult, Jerome. It's difficult to put targets that challenge the status quo, that challenge business as usual, that disrupt existing mechanisms, because we all get comfortable in our own way. Businesses, governments, even people, you don't like to change the way you do your daily routine. But change is necessary. In fact, we're not going to make it if we don't change.
In this instance, change is necessary for survival, basic survival.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And so we want to showcase that it is possible. We've done several things in our past as a nation, in the 50 years that we've been a federation, that demonstrate, and you mentioned it earlier, gas flaring in the 70s, when nobody was even talking about gas flaring. And in many ways, that helped jumpstart the LNG industry, because you're not flaring gas anymore, you need to find a way to liquefy it. All of these types of initiatives that we've taken so much interest in, but also supported across the board, just demonstrates that it is possible to do this. And we just need to share enough and learn enough and then scale it with some ambition as well.
Finally, we are also aware that the UAE supports green infrastructure and clean energy projects worldwide. As you can well imagine, green infrastructure is something that we are very keen on as well here. You've also invested in renewable energy ventures worth around $16.8 billion US in 70 countries. And it's important that I think we point that out. That's very significant, focusing, of course, on developing countries. You've also provided more than $400 million US in aid and soft loans for clean energy projects. Tell us about your efforts, a little bit more about your efforts in that regard, and how can the Bahamas benefit from a program like that?
So there's a clear conviction in the UAE mindset that there's more that can be done and should be done around the world. And we have taken, I would say, a leadership role in going ambitiously, using innovation, using technology to see how we could scale up to better the lives of people. Because we very much believe that, we're not only all connected, but you can't have a good house if your neighborhood is in trouble.
I like that.
And the neighborhood is all of us. Yes. I mean, how many times have you heard of, us being one global village, one connected unit? What happens here naturally impacts your neighbor that is close by, but also your neighbor, which is all the way over there. Because we are, in fact, at the end of the day, all neighbors. I'm constantly convinced again and again, and I've been doing this job for about 12 or 13 years right now, and it's given me the opportunity to travel the world, which is why I've been here 3 times, and I've been to the Pacific Island states, and I've been to South America and Europe and the continent of Africa, etc., etc. And how much privilege I have to be able to visit and learn and explore with people from all around the world. And there's one, Jerome, unifying fact, as different as we are in religion, in dress code, in culture, in language. We all want to lead dignified lives. We all want to care for our family and our elders. And we all have hope that the future must be better for our children. And so how we go about it in development projects, in building stronger partnerships, in being optimistic about what the future can unfold despite all of the challenges, high oil prices. I mean, Prime Minister Davis said this yesterday, high oil prices, high inflation. This is what the world is currently facing right now. But we have stronger ties with one another, and we have technology that can enable and scale and bring solutions. And whether it's climate mitigation or adaptation or looking at new ways of climate financing, there are prospects out there that we need to capitalize on, and we're very keen as the UAE to do exactly that with you and others.
So in the Bahamas, we have a saying, last. So this is my last question.
Okay.
In one sentence, what does success look like for you from these meetings?
So my last answer would be
you got it.
that it's not the last time I meet. And I think what I mean by that is when there's promise for more, as you sit with another friend and you uncover and unlock yet another exciting thing, that's successful. Because you're not just checking a box. You're not saying, I met with this, I met with that, we talked about this, we talked about that. When conversations give birth to huge ideas and great ambition, for that not to be the last meeting, I think that's success.
Your Excellency, I wish we had more time, but I know you have things to do.
And so do you, Jerome.
I do too. Thank you so much. I hope this is not the last
it's
time we get to talk.
Definitely
good
not.
stuff. Thank you so much for coming. It's been an honor. Please come back to the Bahamas. We'd love to have you anytime. Continue to do the great work. Thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. And hopefully you can take something back from these meetings as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Folks, we're going to take one final break and some closing thoughts right after this. So the project really pays itself back.
Correct.
They set up
At the conference, the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV.
So we do thank you for joining us tonight. Just before we go, we know that Caricom has been a bit of an inconvenience for many of you with the traffic and security and road closures, but we do invite and encourage you to take it all in, absorb it, understand it, as this is very important to the country and all that we do in our continued development. Once again, our topic tonight, Caricom, absorbing the Haitian exodus and climate change. Our guests, and we want to thank them, Foreign Affairs Minister Fred Mitchell, along with Foreign Affairs Director General Rhoda Jackson and the UAE's Minister of State for International Cooperation, Rahim Ibrahim Al Hassimi. Be sure and join us next week for another topic that directly affects the lives of Bahamians. Until then, I'm Jerome Sawyer coming to you from Baha Mar for the 44th meeting of the Caricom Heads of Government. We'll see you soon.